Hello everyone, welcome back to Prelims Warm Up. This is an initiative which has been brought to you by Aptiplus Academy for Civil Services. Here we are going to discuss the important questions, mainly the previous year questions which are important for UPSC Prelims 2020. Now as you might be aware that apart from the NCERTs, apart from the standard books, the previous year questions also play a very important role in your preparation for the prelims examination. So that is why in this particular section of prelims warm-up, we are going to discuss the previous year questions from all the various subjects which are there in prelims 2020, and each day we'll be taking up a new subject. So this has been brought to you by Aptiplus, and my name is Shayak Datta. I am the faculty for Geography and Environment at Aptiplus Academy for Civil Services. So let us start with the first question for today. Today we are going to discuss the questions which had come in the previous year from geography. So let us see the first question. The first question is from oceanography, and this question had appeared in the UPSC prelims examination of 2015. So the first question is, tides, they occur in the oceans and seas due to which among the following? Now you might be aware about tides if you have gone through your physical geography section, and inside physical geography you have oceanography. So if you have studied oceanography, then this particular question was asked from oceanography part and you should be able to answer. So the question is asking which of these factors are responsible for tides which occur in the oceans and seas. First factor which has been mentioned is the gravitational force of the sun. Second one which has been mentioned is the gravitational force of the moon. The third one which has been mentioned is the centrifugal force of the earth. So gravitational force of the sun, gravitational force of the moon, and third is the centrifugal force of the earth. Now over here I have seen many of the aspirants, many of the students who are sitting for the first time in the UPSC prelims examination. They might tend to get overexcited and will mark A1 only, that is the gravitational force of the sun. Yeah, so let's say for example, if you had an option where you had 1 and 2, that is the gravitational force of the sun and the gravitational force of the moon, many a times we will get to see aspirants will think that tides in the oceans and seas are caused only by the gravitational force of the sun and the gravitational force of the moon. But the answer you see over here in this particular case, the answer should be D, 1, 2 and 3. Not just the gravitational force of the sun and the gravitational force of the moon, but apart from that we also get to see that the centrifugal force of the earth will also play a role. Now let us try to understand how this happens. Okay? So for the first question the answer should be D, 1, 2 and 3. So you see over here in this particular area I have put a diagram of tides. Now there are two diagrams over here, one over here, the other over here. In both the cases we get to see that, see, this is the earth, okay, this is the earth, and around the earth we have the hydrosphere. Around the earth we have the hydrosphere. Hydrosphere is one of the domains of the earth, and as you know that there are other domains apart from hydrosphere. On the whole there are 4 domains of the earth. So you have the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, you have the lithosphere, and you have the biosphere. So over here we are dealing with the hydrosphere part, and when we say hydrosphere we are basically referring to the areas which are covered by water, mainly the seas and the oceans. That is what we are referring to over here. So we get to see that this light blue color is the layer which is the hydrosphere, and this hydrosphere will be pulled by the gravitational force of the sun as well as the gravitational force of the moon. So these arrows, as you can see, they are pulling the hydrosphere towards the sun and the moon, and the force which is responsible for that is nothing but the gravitational force of the sun and the gravitational force of the moon. But you see, apart from this particular force or the combined effect of these two forces pulling the hydrosphere towards the sun and the moon, we also get to see that on the other side there is another bulge which has got created. Now these bulges which are created, bulging, you can understand that there are 2 bulges over here, one on this side and one on the right hand side. So wherever you can see my pointer, you will find okay, these are the bulges. Let me see. Okay, this is a bulge and this is a bulge which has got created. So please understand, in these two areas where we have bulge, and these bulges, they are referred to as tidal bulges. Okay, these are referred to as tidal bulges. So this particular tidal bulge, as you can see, it is actually not just the effect of the combined gravitational force of the sun and the moon. So basically the combined gravitational pull of the sun and the moon, they are pulling the hydrosphere in this direction, but at the same time we'll also get to see here also we have a tidal bulge getting created. Why is this tidal bulge getting created? That is because of the centrifugal force. So we might be aware about Newton's forces. So you will have an equal and opposite force acting on the opposite direction. So this is the centrifugal force which is resulting in this particular tidal bulge. On the other hand, so basically these areas, you see, let me call this as A and let me call this as B. Okay, so in these A and B sections, these areas will experience high tides. These areas will experience high tides. On the other hand, let's say this area is C and this area is D. So these areas, they will experience low tides. This particular diagram that I have drawn, this is a diagram for something called as spring tides. So once you go through the tide section of oceanography, then you will understand what are the various types of tides which are there. You will have spring tides, neap tides, etc. So understand this is an example of a spring tide that we are talking about. And in this case also we'll get to see that there will be two areas which will be experiencing high tides, two areas which will be experiencing low tides. But in this case we'll get to see that so long as these three bodies, that is the earth, the moon and the sun, so long as they are lying on the same straight line, so long as the earth, moon and sun are lying on the same straight line, we will get to see that the height of the high tides will be unusually high. Matlab, the high tides will be higher than the average height of the high tides. Similarly, in areas like C and D, the low tides which will be experienced, the height of the low tides will be lower than the average height of the low tides. Such kind of a situation arises only when these three bodies, that is the earth, sun and the moon, are on the same straight line. Such kind of a situation is what is called as a syzygy position. This kind of a situation is what is called as a syzygy position. You can learn more about it once you go through the physical geography section. Syzygy, what is syzygy position? Similarly, over here in this particular diagram, as you can see, the moon, the earth and the sun, they are making a right angle. Such kind of a situation or such kind of a position when the earth, moon and the sun, they make a right angle, is what is referred to as a quadrature position. This will result in the formation of neap tides. So this is a spring tide, this is a neap tide. But basic thing is what you should remember is this, that tides, they are not only caused by the gravitational force of attraction of the sun and the moon, but also because of the centrifugal force. Okay, so for your question number 1, the answer is 1, 2 and 3. D, 1, 2 and 3 is the right answer. Moving on to question number 2. Question number 2, this particular question had also come in 2015, and this was a very controversial question, you can say, because the answer for this was not found in the standard books as such. The question is, what explains the eastward flow of the equatorial countercurrent? This is also a question from the oceanography section of physical geography. Question is asking what explains the eastward flow of the equatorial countercurrent. Now the thing is, you will only be able to answer this question or even attempt this question if you are aware about this particular ocean current, that is the equatorial countercurrent. So for this you have to remember that particular page of the atlas which contains the ocean currents. Okay, the first option is A, the Earth's rotation on its axis. B, the convergence of the two equatorial currents. C, the difference in salinity of water, and D, the occurrence of the belt of calm near the equator. Now, why this question was very difficult, I mean, for people who had appeared in 2015, was because of the fact that the answer was not easily available in any of the standard books as such. So many of the institutes came up with their own answer keys, and there was a lot of variation in the answer for this particular question. Eventually we had to wait for UPSC to come up with the official answer keys, and UPSC said that for this particular question the answer should be B, 2B. So let us first understand what is this equatorial counter current, and for that you have to remember this particular diagram. So you can remember it from your atlas itself. You see over here, can you see this particular current, equatorial counter current, or here also you'll get to see, here also you'll get to see. So all along the equator you will find this equatorial counter current, even this one. So the thing is, what is this? Now very interestingly, if you notice that on either side of the equator you will have two ocean currents. One is called as north equatorial current, the other is called as the south equatorial current. Now what you should do is that you notice the direction of the north and the south equatorial current. If you notice the direction, if you look very closely, you will find that the direction of flow of the north and the south equatorial current, they are from east to west. Both north and south equatorial currents, they flow from east to west. Now interestingly, we have a counter equatorial current which flows in the opposite direction. See, this will flow in the opposite direction, whereas the north equatorial current will also flow like this, the south equatorial current will also flow like this, that is east to west, whereas the counter equatorial current, it flows from west to east. Question is why? So what UPSC said is this, it is because of the convergence of what? Convergence of these two currents, that is north equatorial current and the south equatorial current, they will converge. What happens is this, on either side of the equator you have the tropics. Now this tropics, right, tropics up to let's say around 30-40 degree latitudes on either side of the equator. So these tropical zones or these tropics, they are the zones for the trade winds. These are the zones for the trade winds. And as you might be aware, the direction of the trade wind is somewhat like this. As you can see from this is the direction in which the trade winds will blow. Similarly, if I look at the southern hemisphere, also you will find that the trade winds will blow like this. Now what happens is this, sometimes these trade winds become very strong, and when these trade winds they become very strong, what will happen? They will push the north equatorial current and the south equatorial current towards one another. They will push the north and the south equatorial current towards each other. As a result of which, what will happen is, sometimes it is possible that the north and the south equatorial current, they will merge with one another. Wherever the south and the north equatorial current merges with each other, and why are they merging? They will merge because of the strong trade winds which are forcing them to merge basically. So wherever they will merge, what will happen? Just try to visualize, wherever you have two currents which normally flow parallel to one another, if they merge with each other, automatically in that particular portion of the sea or the ocean, you will find that the level of the ocean water, that will rise. The level of the ocean water will rise. It will be higher than usual. Automatically, if there is rise in the level of the ocean water, let's say ocean water is rising like this, what will the water try to do? Water will always try to seek a lower level. So it will flow backwards. Water will always try to seek a lower level. It will try to flow backwards. So basically, see, if this ocean current, the north equatorial current and the south equatorial current, if they converge together, water will try to flow backwards. Water, it will try to flow backwards, so that the height of water once again goes back to its original level. So it is because of this backflow, what happens is the counter equatorial current gets generated. Okay? And sometimes it becomes strong also. So the answer for this particular question is B. Okay? Convergence of the two equatorial currents. Which two equatorial currents? The north and the south equatorial current. That results in the formation of the counter equatorial current. So for question number 2, B is the right answer. Moving on. to question number 3. Question number 3 is with regards to dewdrops. Now this is a part of your climatology. So question is, why are dewdrops not formed on a cloudy night? This question was asked in the year 2019 prelims. Why are dewdrops not formed on a cloudy night? Now what is a dew, or how are dew formed? So you must have experienced dewdrops if you have ever walked on grassy areas, or let's say meadows, lawns early on in a winter morning. So what basically happens is, if there is a lot of humidity in the air, that is a lot of moisture is present in the air, and at the same time the night is cool, the night is, I mean, you have a long night, you have a cold night, and the temperature falls below the dew point. What is the dew point? Dew point is basically that temperature at which you will find that air will be saturated. Okay? Temperature at which air will become saturated. What is meant by saturation of air? Saturation means the relative humidity will become 100%. That is, the air, like whatever was the maximum amount of moisture that the air could accommodate at a particular temperature, it will be holding that amount of moisture. So basically, when relative humidity becomes 100%, we say the air is saturated. The temperature at which an air becomes saturated is what is called as a dew point. If the temperature of an area goes below the dew point, in that case you will find that water will change into water droplets, or they will precipitate as water droplets. And if you have a surface, if you have an object where the temperature of that surface is cold enough to go below the dew point, you will find that on that surface water will condense in the form of water droplets, which we call as dew. So basically there are certain conditions which are necessary for dew to be formed. One of the conditions being that the temperature of the night should be cold enough. It should be a cool, long night. Now the question is asking, why are dewdrops not formed on a cloudy night? This is something which we do get to see, and it is asking you the reason for that. A. Clouds absorb the radiation which is released from the Earth's surface. Clouds absorb the radiation which is released from the Earth's surface. B. Clouds reflect back the Earth's radiation. C. The Earth's surface would have low temperature on cloudy night. And D. Clouds deflect the blowing wind to ground level. So these are the options which are given to you, and you have been asked to choose the correct option. You see, when you are studying about climatology, and in climatology when you are doing dewdrops, before that you will come across a particular word which is called as albedo. Albedo. What is albedo? Albedo basically is a term which is which tries to say what is the percentage of radiation which is reflected back by a particular surface. What is the percentage of the total incoming radiation which is reflected back by a particular surface, and that is what is referred to as albedo. Okay, so please remember, shinier the surface, or a surface which is having a lighter color will have higher albedo, which means it will be able to reflect back more amount of radiation. On the other hand, darker the color of the surface, or so basically darker the color of the surface or less shiny it is, it will be able to absorb more amount of radiation, as a result of which it will have lower albedo. Okay, this much you understand. So in case of clouds, what happens is, clouds, they will have high albedo, because as you can understand, most of the clouds will be light colored clouds. Now what happens is, in case of a cloudy night, you must be aware about something which is called as terrestrial radiation. So the earth acts like a black body. It will absorb the heat from the sun, from the incoming solar radiation, or what we call as insolation. The earth will absorb, or the earth's surface will absorb all these heat from the insolation during the daytime, and after the sun sets, what the earth's surface will do is, it will radiate out all these heat it had absorbed throughout the day. These heat which it radiates out, this is what is called as terrestrial radiation, and it is this terrestrial radiation which is responsible for determining the temperature of an area, or temperature in an area actually. So what happens is, if you have, I think I have a diagram for this. So you first understand this diagram. Okay, let's say you have a clear night. Okay, you have a clear night, and because it is night, of course there's no sunlight involved over here. So if you have a clear night, then all this terrestrial radiation can easily escape out into space. And if that happens, if there is no cloud in the sky, if it is a clear night, all this radiation escapes out into the space. So automatically we will get to see that the temperature of area will start to drop. It will start to drop. But you see, if you have a cloudy night, then what happens? If you have a cloudy night, then you will have terrestrial radiation taking place, but this heat cannot go into space. What will happen is they will hit the cloud and they will once again get reflected back onto the Earth's surface. Can you understand here? In the second diagram, you can understand that terrestrial radiation is taking place, but what is happening is all these heat, it cannot escape out into the atmosphere, or it cannot escape out into space. It is getting reflected by the clouds and it has to come back towards the surface, resulting in the temperature not actually falling too much. That is why you will find during cloudy nights you will actually feel warm. And on the other hand, if you go to deserts, okay, if you go to deserts during the night, even when it is not winter time, you will feel very cold. Why? Because deserts are usually areas where you will have very low humidity, and hence hardly will there be any cloud formation. Deserts are usually you will find mainly cloudless sky. So as a result of which, in case of deserts, what happens is that there is rapid loss of heat because of terrestrial radiation. On the other hand, here you will get to see the heat is getting reflected back. So that is why you will find cloudy nights are usually very uncomfortably warm. So what happens is this, if the temperature does not fall, automatically what will happen, dew point of air will not be reached. If dew point is not reached, what will happen, there will not be saturation of the air, and you will not find condensation taking place. So it is very necessary that you have a cloudless clear sky and you have a long night. Temperature has to fall, otherwise dewdrops will not be formed, and that is why we get to see dewdrops mainly formed. We get to see them mainly on winter mornings. Okay, so 3B should be the right answer, as we can see from here. Moving on to the next question, question number 4. The seasonal reversal of winds is the typical characteristic of which type of climate? The seasonal reversal of wind, it is the typical characteristic of which type of climate? I just forgot to mention, I think it was this question, it had come in 2014, if I'm not wrong. Most probably it was in 2014. Anyway, just need to check once. So the thing is, seasonal reversal of winds is the typical characteristic of which type of climate? A, equatorial climate; B, Mediterranean climate; C, monsoon climate; and D, all of the above climates. See, there are certain terms, there are certain terms that you should remember which are associated with certain type of climate. Seasonal reversal of wind, this is a very characteristic property of the monsoon type of climate. Please remember, seasonal reversal of wind, it is a characteristic property of monsoon type of climate. Like let's say for example India has a hot monsoonal climate, and India also experiences seasonal reversal of wind. Almost 180-degree reversal will be there. How? We will see in a while. Similarly, when it comes to Mediterranean climate, please remember, in case of Mediterranean climates, they might mention shifting of wind belts. So in your question, if you anywhere see that they are mentioning shifting of wind belts taking place and they are asking you which type of climate is being referred to, please remember shifting of wind belt is a characteristic property which is seen in case of Mediterranean type of climate. Similarly, in case of Mediterranean type of climate, you will also have winter rainfall and summer drought condition. Equatorial climate, it is uniform throughout the year, and there will be 2 rainfall peaks, okay, mainly coinciding with the equinoxes. So equatorial climate is, again, please remember there will be double rainfall peaks. That is again sometimes seen in the question. Double rainfall peak, uniform climate or uniform temperature throughout the year. Very low amount of very low range of temperature will be seen in case of equatorial climate. Low range of temperature means what? Okay, the difference between the highest and the lowest temperature in a year, that will not be very high. The range will be low. So anyway, now coming to seasonal reversal of wind, that is a characteristic property which is seen in case of monsoon climate. How? Let's see. Look at this. This is India. When it is summertime, there is something called as ITCZ, or Intertropical Convergence Zone. Now, what is meant by Intertropical Convergence Zone? This is something which you have to find out on your own. Please go home, and you're at home only, so please Google a bit and go through your books. What is Intertropical Convergence Zone? Okay, ITCZ, Intertropical Convergence Zone. Very, very important term when it comes to physical geography. And this is also very important if you have to understand India's monsoon. Okay, ITCZ. So anyway, just to give you some idea, ITCZ during summertime, ITCZ, it will be present on top of India, somewhat like this. Running from Rajasthan all the way up to Bihar, you will find ITCZ will be located somewhat like this. And this ITCZ, along with the Tibetan plateau which is located over here, what it will do, it will become extremely hot. Even India's land surface will become very hot, and there will be a low pressure, an intense low pressure which will form over India's land surface as well as in the Tibetan plateau. This intense low pressure will draw the winds, and what kind of winds are they? They are nothing but the trade winds. So basically the trade winds, mainly from the southern hemisphere, the trade winds will get attracted towards India's land because India is experiencing intense low pressure, and these trade winds, they will actually come down. Basically these are nothing but the southeast trade winds which are found in the southern hemisphere. But because the ITCZ is lying over India's landmass, so there will be a shift of the wind belts to the north. Now how does this shift of the wind belts take place? Again, just try to find out a bit, go through your books, there are multiple videos on YouTube you can find how shifting of wind belts take place. So during summer, what happens is this ITCZ, it will be over the northern hemisphere. All the wind belts will shift to the north, and as a result of which we will get to see that these trade winds, which ideally should have been present in the southern hemisphere, they will now cross the equator. Once they cross the equator, because of Coriolis force, they will be deflected to their right. So the southeast trade winds, which ideally in the southern hemisphere they blow in this direction, they will cross the equator, they will get deflected to the right because of Coriolis force, and they will come towards India from the southwest direction. From the southwest direction, these southeast trade winds will come, and these trade winds only will be called as the monsoon or the southwest monsoon. So just after summer, we will have these southwest monsoon entering into India from the southwest direction. On the other hand, during winter, what happens is this ITCZ, it will go to the south. ITCZ is an area of intense low pressure. Basically, it is indicating the overhead position of the sun. So wherever the sun is present overhead, just below that you will have a very intense low pressure zone, and that intense low pressure zone is what is called as ITCZ, or the Intertropical Convergence Zone. So anyway, during winter, what will happen? The ITCZ will travel to the south, and we will get to see that all these trade winds, they will also completely reverse their direction, and they will follow the ITCZ and move to the south. This is nothing but what we call as the northeast monsoon, sometimes also referred to as the retreating monsoon. So during the winter, we will have the northeast monsoon or the retreating monsoon. And what are these northeast or the retreating monsoon? Again, nothing separate, but it is nothing but the northeast trade winds only. Okay, these northeast trade winds, they will flow all over India as the retreating monsoon. So you see, there is a complete change in direction. During our southwest monsoon, the winds were flowing like this. During northeast or the retreating monsoon, the winds are flowing like this. So this is a very characteristic feature of the monsoon type of climate. Understood? This is a very characteristic feature of the monsoon type of climate. So seasonal reversal of winds, please immediately remember, okay, monsoon type of climate. Moving on to the last question for today, question number 5. Question 5 is asking, which of the following are the unique characteristics of equatorial forest, which was asked in 2013. So which of the following are the unique characteristics of equatorial forests? Number 1, presence of tall, closely set trees with crowns which form a continuous canopy. So in case of equatorial forest, just in your head think about the Amazonian rainforest. In channels like National Geographic or Discovery or Animal Planet, you might have seen how the Amazonian rainforest looks like from the top. Okay, so first thing is it will be very dense, right? So that is why you'll find very tall. Why the trees will be tall? The trees will be tall because there will be a competition for sunlight. So any tree which is not able to grow tall enough to get access to sunlight, that tree will die. So in order to live, in order to survive, the trees will have to grow tall. So that is why we will find that there will be tall trees. They'll be very closely set because of high temperature, because of sufficient amount of moisture. You will find the trees they'll be very close to one another, and they will be having large crowns. Crowns is the leafy part of the tree, that is that part which contains the leaves, the branches, etc. And canopy is basically the surface area which is covered by the crown. That is what is called as the canopy. So if you look at it from the top, you will find that there's a continuous canopy. So first point is definitely true in case of equatorial forest. Second, coexistence of a large number of species. Acha, before that, I would also like to mention one more thing, that yes, the trees will be tall, the trees will be closely set, very dense trees will find, the trees will be very dense in nature. You will have a continuous canopy. All that is correct, but at the same time, please remember that the soil in case of an equatorial rainforest, the soil will not be fertile. The soil will not be fertile because of leaching taking place. So there's a lot of leaching which takes place from the soil, as a result of which most of the important nutrients get leached away from the soil. What is leaching? Leaching basically means the washing away of the nutrients which are present in the top layer of the soil onto the lower layers by the percolating water. Mainly where does the water come from? From the raindrops. So basic thing is this, please remember that the soil in case of an equatorial rainforest is not fertile. So this is what happens. The nutrients are present, but the nutrients are present deep in the lower layers of the soil, not in the upper layers. So first statement is correct. Second statement, coexistence of a large number of species. The biodiversity is very high. In fact, places like the Amazonian rainforest, there's a huge amount of biodiversity. They are also called as the lungs of the earth, and that is because of the coexistence of a large number of species, and that is another reason why lumbering, or basically the cutting down of trees, is not a very economically feasible or economical activity in case of equatorial rainforest. The thing is, when the problem is that there are so many diverse species present in a small area, that makes lumbering not really economical as such, because you do not have all the economically valuable species present at one single place. You will have, let's say, one economically valuable species, something like a mahogany will be there, but mahogany will be surrounded by many other species which might not be that valuable in terms of market value basically. So that is why lumbering is not a very popular activity in such areas. So second statement is also correct. Coexistence of a large number of species will be there, and presence of numerous varieties of epiphytes. What are epiphytes? Epiphytes are mainly those climbers which will grow on other trees, but they will mainly grow in order to get sufficient amount of moisture, sunlight, etc., not to extract nutrients out of the host tree. So basically these epiphytes are climbers, but they won't harm the host tree as such. And in case of equatorial rainforest, we do get to see a lot of such epiphytes. So all the three statements are correct, and answer should be D, 1, 2 and 3. And if you have not seen an equatorial rainforest from the sky, this is from the air, this is how it looks like a complete canopy. You can see, hardly can you see the ground. The canopy is so dense, the canopy is so complete. Okay, so with this we complete the 5 questions for today. So we are going to look at many more previous year questions. I hope you have liked this session, and please let us know in the comments your review regarding this particular initiative, and we'll meet again with a new set of questions for UPSC Prelims 2020. So thank you so much. Till then, goodbye and take care.
I should fuck her in the Benz.